Though racked by depression and threatened by war clouds building up in Europe and Asia, the 1930s are a decade in which the VFW institutes many of the programs that forge a bond between it and the community and, in turn, the nation. Sons of the VFW, bicycle safety, Boy Scout affiliation, junior softball, and the Americanism program, which expands the programs of the Americanization Committee.
It is also the decade in which the VFW achieves the goal of having the Veterans Bureau of 1921 transformed into the Veterans Administration, thereby increasing services to America's veterans.
With its membership hitting another record level, 199,199, the VFW wins the battle for the World War I cash bonus on January 27, 1936, when the Senate overrides the President's veto and America's World War I veterans can now redeem their 20-year endowments for cash.
Recognizing the VFW's ever-growing strength, power, and influence, Congress grants it a congressional charter in May 1936.
1939, war breaks out in Europe. The VFW supports neutrality, but calls for a strong national defense. It is ignored.
From college campuses to Main Street, millions of Americans protest war, military readiness, and military service.
During its September 1941 convention, the VFW again calls for a strong national defense. Again, it is ignored until early on the morning of December 7, 1941.
In moments, America is thrown into another world war, and VFW members lead the way to the enlistment office.
The VFW quickly becomes the major force in recruiting aviation cadets for America's growing air power, and they raise $150,000 to provide the Army Air Corps with 10 training planes.
But the VFW knows that there is more to winning a war than just arms and ammunition. Morale is the deciding factor.
VFW members volunteer for dozens of home front wartime duties, from air raid wardens to hospital attendants, blood drives to scrap metal drives. And the ladies' auxiliary members send cards, letters, cookies, and cakes to the troops overseas. Wherever troops go, the VFW remembers them and supports them.
The VFW asked Congress for entitlements for those serving in World War II.
Congress agrees and passes several bills providing a wide range of entitlements for the troops while on active duty and for when they return as veterans.
In 1943, VFW Commander-in-Chief Bob Merrill flies to North Africa to visit the troops fighting on that front.
VFW membership soars to new records as troops sign up while they're still under fire on battlefields around the world, 304,764 by the end of 1943.
With 16 million Americans in uniform, the VFW establishes a special training program for its service officers so that they will be able to handle the flood of cases coming home with the veterans.
As the war goes on, the VFW asks Congress for better VA hospitals.
Congress agrees and appropriates $500 million.
When the tide turns and the end is in sight, the VFW asks Congress for mustering out pay.
Congress agrees.
The VFW asks for a GI Bill of Rights.
Congress agrees and passes one of the best pieces of legislation to ever come out of Capitol Hill. It opens the way to a bright and promising future for all who served in World War II and takes America into a golden era that exists to this day.
1945, unconditional surrender in both theaters of war. Victory is ours, but the price was very, very high. 408,306 dead. 670,846 wounded, 78,000 missing in action.
VFW membership hit 741,310, and VFW posts spring up around the world.
In the aftermath of the Second World War, the VFW establishes its National Security and Foreign Affairs program.
In the post-war era, the VFW fights for better medical care, housing, increased education benefits, insurance for veterans, and jobs for veterans.
This is also the era in which the VFW takes up sponsorship of the Voice of Democracy Scholarship Program that provides high school students with college scholarships.
In 1948, the VFW increases its community involvement with the first community service contest. It soon becomes one of the VFW's most popular programs and grows larger and benefits more people each year.
1949. Happy 50th birthday, VFW. On hand with best wishes are President Truman, Bob Hope, Dinah Shore, and the 1949 Buddy Poppy girl, Janice Page.
The VFW Midwinter Washington, D.C. Conference is initiated this year to allow members to meet with congressional delegations and discuss veterans legislation.
A decade ends, a new one begins, and with it, another war. On June 25, 1950, Communist North Korean forces surged southward, invading South Korea. VFW Commander-in-Chief Clyde Lewis pledges VFW support to President Truman.
The VFW asked Congress to extend GI Bill benefits to those now fighting in Korea.
Congress agrees.
The VFW lobbies Congress to keep the VA hospital system intact, now that it is needed for a new generation of wartime veterans.
Congress agrees.
The VFW wins another fight over veterans' preference in civil service jobs.
And it achieves another priority goal when Congress passes the Uniform Code of Military Justice.
Recognizing the ever-growing strength, power, and influence of the VFW, President Truman himself becomes a life member in 1952, just after the life membership program is instituted.
As the war grinds on in Korea, VFW members and Ladies Auxiliary members again support the troops on the front lines with food, letters, and Christmas packages.
On July 27, 1953, the fighting in Korea ends and a fragile ceasefire begins, which remains in effect to this day.
The toll for freeing South Korea from communist oppression is high. 36,916 dead, 103,284 wounded, 7,000 missing in action.
The 1950s also saw the creation of the VFW Natural Disaster Relief Fund, which has since given millions in aid to victims of floods, fires, tornadoes, and other disasters.
The office of VFW Adjutant General and Quartermaster became two separate offices in recognition of the growing demands of an ever-growing organization.
Under the growing threat of communism, a decade that began in war sees American troops also holding the line against tyranny in Lebanon, Taiwan, and the islands of Quemoy and Matsu.
The VFW succeeds in having November 11th established as Veterans Day and May 1st as Loyalty Day.
The VFW breaks ground for its Washington, D.C. office on June 1, 1958.
In February of 1960, President Eisenhower travels to Capitol Hill for the dedication of the VFW Washington office, and while there, lights the eternal light in the lobby.
1962. VFW membership hits 1,139,157.
While the Cold War grows worse, hot wars break out around the world. The Congo, Vietnam, Laos, Cuba, Panama Canal, and the Dominican Republic. In 1967, Israeli forces attack the USS Liberty on patrol in the Mediterranean. 34 sailors die.